6 weeks after my husband died, I discovered he'd been sending nearly $2,000 a month to another woman, and his parents knew exactly why. My husband, Nathan Cole, was 42 when he died, and if you had met him even once, you would have described him as steady. Not flashy, not dramatic, just solid. The kind of man who checked the smoke detector batteries every spring without being asked. The kind who brought home groceries in reusable bags he kept folded in the trunk like it was a personal moral code. We lived in Maplewood, a quiet suburb outside Columbus, where nothing especially terrible was supposed to happen. Our biggest neighborhood drama was usually someone's dog getting loose or the HOA arguing about fence heights. Nathan worked as a commercial construction estimator. He spent his days buried in blueprints and cost projections, muttering about steel prices and labor shortages. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, and he was good at it. I worked as a guidance counselor at the local high school, which meant my job was basically absorbing other people's crises for a living. We'd been married 10 years. No kids. Not because we didn't want them, we kept saying we would start trying soon. First, we wanted to be financially stable. Then we wanted to finish renovations on the house. Then COVID happened and everything felt uncertain. After that, it just became one of those conversations you postpone because there will always be more time. Until there isn't. The morning Nathan died was aggressively normal. He complained about heartburn over coffee, pressing his fist into his chest like he could push the discomfort back down. I told him to take antacids and skip work. He insisted it was nothing. "I've got a site meeting," he said, already grabbing his keys. "I'll be fine." Those were the last words he said to me. An hour later, I got a call from an unknown number. A man's voice asking if I was Maria Smith. Then the phrase, "your husband." Then the words, "cardiac arrest." Everything after that sounded like it was underwater. By the time I reached St. Luke's Medical Center, he was already gone. People say shock protects you, and I guess that's true. The first few weeks felt like living inside a snow globe that someone else kept shaking. Everything was muffled, distant, surreal. I signed forms without reading them. I thanked people without remembering who they were. I nodded through conversations I couldn't later recall. Nathan's parents moved into our guest room for nearly 3 weeks. My best friend Angela practically lived on our couch when she wasn't working night shifts at the ER. My older brother flew in from Arizona and tried to fix things around the house that weren't broken because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. Everyone kept saying I was holding up so well. I wasn't holding up. I just hadn't collapsed yet. When they finally left, the quiet felt hostile. Every room still looked like Nathan might walk into it at any moment. His running shoes by the door. His coffee mug in the drying rack. His jacket draped over the back of a chair like he'd be back in 5 minutes. But he wasn't coming back, and the world didn't pause to accommodate that. Bills still arrived. Accounts still needed managing. Death, I learned, comes with an exhausting amount of paperwork. Nathan had always handled our finances. Not because he controlled them, because he enjoyed that kind of organization. Spreadsheets were his comfort zone. I trusted him completely. We had one main joint account where both our salaries went, and he paid everything from there. About 6 weeks after the funeral, I sat at our kitchen table with his laptop, a legal pad, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I took a second sip. My plan was simple: list every recurring payment, close what needed closing, make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. At first, it was boring. Utilities. Mortgage. Insurance. Streaming services we barely used. Normal life stuff. Then I noticed a name I didn't recognize. Jennifer Hale. There was a transfer to her account for $1,850. I assumed it was a one-time thing. Maybe reimbursement for something. Maybe a contractor he'd paid personally and forgotten to mention. Nathan's job involved dealing with a lot of subcontractors and consultants. But then I saw the next month. And the month before that. And the month before that. Every single month. Same amount. Same name. My stomach tightened, but I kept scrolling, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. There had to be. Nathan wasn't secretive. We shared everything, or at least I thought we did. The payments went back years. Not 1 or 2. 7. 7 years of monthly transfers to the same woman, totaling more money than we'd spent on our entire kitchen renovation. My hands started to tremble so badly I had to press them flat against the table to steady them. I tried to remember if I'd ever heard that name before. A coworker. A relative. Someone from church. Nothing. It was like staring at a stranger's bank statement. Nathan worked from home most days. We ate dinner together almost every night. We watched TV on the same couch, argued about what to order for takeout, complained about traffic even though neither of us had a long commute. When would he even have had time for a whole separate life? I told myself it couldn't be what my brain was starting to suggest. Nathan wasn't that guy. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't cruel, he wasn't the type to juggle secrets. He once confessed he'd accidentally taken an extra pen from a hotel and felt guilty about it. Still, The numbers didn't lie. I texted Derek Lawson, one of Nathan's oldest friends. Hey, weird question, I wrote. Do you know anyone named Jennifer Hale? Going through finances. He replied a few minutes later. Not that I know of. Why? I stared at the screen, debating how much to say. Just something I don't recognize, I typed back. Probably work-related, he responded. Nate dealt with tons of vendors. Probably work-related. I wanted that to be true so badly it almost hurt. But work expenses don't usually come out of personal joint accounts. And they definitely don't happen on the exact same date every month for 7 straight years. The kitchen suddenly felt too bright, too quiet, too exposed. Like the walls themselves were watching me realize something I wasn't ready to know. I clicked on one of the transfers to see more details. It was a direct bank-to-bank payment. No invoice. No memo. No business name attached. Just a person. Jennifer Hale. My throat felt tight, like I'd swallowed something sharp. I closed the laptop, then immediately opened it again, as if shutting it could somehow undo what I'd seen. Grief had already hollowed me out. I didn't know how much more I could hold. But once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. And a small, cold voice in the back of my mind kept whispering the same terrible possibility, one I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Because if that voice was right, then the man I had just spent 10 years loving had been living a life I never even knew existed. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that number, $1,850, repeating like a metronome, month after month, year after year. It felt less like a payment and more like a heartbeat I had never noticed before, steady and hidden beneath everything else. At 3 in the morning, I gave up pretending rest was possible and went back downstairs. The house was cold in that hollow way empty houses get at night. Nathan used to keep it warmer because he was always cold. I hadn't touched the thermostat since he died, like changing it would somehow erase him further. I opened his laptop again. Jennifer Hale. This time I typed her name into Google. At first, nothing helpful came up. A LinkedIn profile for a dental supply company in another state. An old track meet result from the early 2000s. Random people with the same name who clearly weren't connected to Ohio. Then I tried Facebook. One profile stood out immediately. The account was mostly private, but the location said Dayton. About an hour and a half west of Maplewood. Close enough to be real. Close enough to be dangerous. Her profile picture was a woman in her mid-30s with light brown hair pulled into a low ponytail, wearing scrubs and standing in what looked like a pharmacy break room. She wasn't glamorous or intimidating. Just normal. Someone you'd stand behind in line at the grocery store and never remember. My chest tightened for a reason I couldn't explain. I clicked through what little I could see. A few public photos. Coffee cups. A park. A birthday cake shaped like a soccer ball. And then I saw him. A little boy, maybe 7 or 8, grinning at the camera with 2 missing front teeth and a lopsided haircut. He was wearing a bright blue jersey, shin guards too big for his legs, cleats that looked brand new. I don't know how to explain what happened next without sounding dramatic, but something inside me just dropped. He looked like Nathan. Not exactly. Not in a way that would hold up in court or anything. But the shape of his eyes, the slope of his nose, the way his smile tilted slightly more to one side, it was familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to convince myself I was projecting. Lots of kids have brown hair and brown eyes. Faces blur together. Grief makes you see things. But the longer I looked, the harder it became to dismiss. My hands started to shake again. No, I whispered to the empty kitchen, as if someone had accused him out loud. No, that's not possible. Nathan didn't travel much. His job was mostly local. When he did have overnight trips, they were planned weeks in advance, and he called me constantly because he hated hotel rooms. He used to complain that the silence made him feel like he was floating in space. There was no room in our life for a secret child. Unless the secret had started before me. That thought landed differently. Not better, just more complicated. I checked the dates on the photos. The little boy had school pictures posted every year. Kindergarten. 1st grade. 2nd grade. Always tagged by Jennifer, sometimes by a few relatives whose names I didn't recognize. His name was John. Just John. No father listed anywhere. No mention of Nathan. No hints, no cryptic captions, nothing dramatic. If you didn't know what you were looking for, it was just a single mom posting about her kid, which somehow made it worse. I closed the browser and pushed the laptop away like it might burn me. Maybe I should stop. Maybe not knowing was safer. Nathan was gone. Whatever this was couldn't be fixed, confronted, or undone. Digging deeper would only hurt more. But another thought crept in, quiet and poisonous. What if this affected my life in ways I didn't understand yet? Finances, legal issues, inheritance, something I hadn't even considered. Ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. I opened the laptop again. This time I searched public records. Property ownership. court filings, anything with her name attached. I felt like a detective in my own marriage, piecing together evidence I had never consented to collect. Eventually, I found an address linked to her, a modest townhouse complex on the outskirts of Dayton. Nothing fancy, nothing run down. Just ordinary. Ordinary. That word kept echoing. If Nathan had been funding some dramatic secret life, at least there would be something obvious to hate. A luxury apartment. Expensive gifts. Something that screamed betrayal in bold letters. But this looked like survival. That didn't make it better. It made it messier. Around dawn, I finally closed the laptop for good and sat at the table with my head in my hands. My temples throbbed. My eyes burned. I felt like I'd aged 10 years overnight. I told myself I would wait. Give it a few days. See if the panic faded. It didn't. Every normal activity became distorted by the question humming in the background. Brushing my teeth. Feeding the dog. Driving past the elementary school on my way to the grocery store. There were children everywhere, laughing, running, existing in a world that suddenly felt hostile and unfamiliar. By the third day, I couldn't stand it anymore. I went back to the laptop, opened the email account Nathan and I shared for household stuff, and composed a message. I stared at the blank screen for nearly 20 minutes before typing anything. How do you write to someone who might have destroyed your marriage without ever meeting you? In the end, I kept it painfully neutral. Hello, my name is Maria Smith. I'm trying to settle the financial accounts of my late husband, Nathan Cole, and your name appeared in several transactions. He passed away recently, and I'm just trying to understand everything. If you could clarify, I would appreciate it. I read it 5 times to make sure there was no accusation in it, no emotion, nothing that could escalate things unnecessarily. Just facts. My finger hovered over the send button. Once I sent it, there would be no taking it back. No pretending I hadn't opened this door. Just information, I whispered to myself. You're just asking for information. I hit send. The confirmation message popped up instantly, cheerful and oblivious. Email sent. And, just like that, the waiting began. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept my phone within arm's reach, jumping every time it buzzed. Spam messages made my heart race. A reminder from the dentist nearly sent me into a panic spiral. By evening, I convinced myself she wouldn't reply. Maybe the email address was outdated. Maybe she'd ignore it. Maybe this whole thing would fade back into uncertainty, and I could choose to believe whatever version hurt least. At 9:42 p.m., my phone vibrated. Unknown email notification. My hands went cold as I opened it. The message was short. I am so sorry for your loss. I didn't know. Yes, I can explain, but it's not something I think should be written in email. Could we speak on the phone? No denial. No confusion. No, wrong person. Just quiet, careful confirmation that there was something to explain. My pulse started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. That tone wasn't defensive. It wasn't surprised. It was resigned. Like someone who had always known this conversation might come someday. I set the phone down on the table and stepped away from it, as if distance might dilute its power. No, I said out loud. No, I don't have to do this tonight. But the silence in the house pressed in again, heavy and suffocating, and curiosity, or dread, began clawing its way up my spine. Because whatever the truth was, it was already sitting in my inbox, waiting for me to pick up the phone and hear it out loud. I waited 2 days before calling her. Not because I was busy. Not because I forgot. Because every time I picked up my phone, my chest tightened so badly it felt like something inside me was physically trying to stop me. I told myself I needed time to prepare. To think of questions. To steady myself. The truth was, I was terrified of hearing something that couldn't be unheard. On the second night, sometime after midnight, I found myself sitting on the living room floor with Nathan's old hoodie wrapped around me like armor. The TV was on but muted, flickering images I wasn't processing. The house felt too big, too quiet, too aware of me. I realized I was waiting for morning like that would somehow make the conversation less devastating. It wouldn't. So I picked up my phone, found her email, and tapped the number she had included in her reply. My hand was shaking so badly I had to use both hands just to hold the phone steady. It rang twice. 3 times. Then a click. Hello. Her voice was soft, cautious. Younger than I expected. Not nervous exactly, more like someone bracing for impact. Hi, I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Flat. Mechanical. This is Maria. Maria Smith. There was a pause on the line. Not long, but heavy. I know, she said quietly. I've been expecting your call. Something about that made my stomach drop even further. Expecting. Like this had always been inevitable. I don't really know where to start, I admitted. I do, she said. Another small pause. I'm very sorry for your loss. The words should have felt comforting. Instead, they landed like stones. Thank you, I said automatically. Then, because the silence was unbearable, I forced the question out. Can you explain why my husband was sending you money? There it was. No easing into it. No polite buffer. On the other end, I heard her inhale slowly, like someone preparing to dive underwater. I think you deserve to know the truth, she said. Nathan is my son's father. For a second, I genuinely thought the call had glitched. That my brain had misheard. I'm sorry, what? I asked, though the words had already sunk in. My son, she repeated, her voice trembling now. John. He's 8. Nathan is his dad. The room tilted. I didn't drop the phone, but I stopped feeling it in my hand. Sound became distant, muffled, like I had suddenly been sealed inside glass. 8. 8 years old. Nathan and I had been married 10. Which meant. I squeezed my eyes shut as if that could stop the math from completing itself. Are you sure? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. I mean, there could be a mistake. There isn't, she said gently. We did a paternity test when he was born. Of course they did. A wave of nausea rolled through me so suddenly, I had to press my free hand against the floor to steady myself. I can send it to you, she added quickly. The results, I mean. If you want proof. No, the word came out sharper than I intended. No, I don't. I don't need that. Proof would make it real in a way I wasn't ready for. She didn't argue. Just waited. I realized she was letting me control the pace, like you would with someone handling something fragile. How? I finally asked. When? We dated briefly years ago, she said. Before you. It wasn't serious. When I found out I was pregnant, he panicked. He wanted me to terminate. I didn't. Her voice wavered, but she kept going. We broke up. Didn't speak for months. Then after John was born, he contacted me. He said he wanted to help financially, but didn't think being involved directly would be healthy for his new relationship. New relationship. Me. I pressed my forehead against my knees, trying to breathe. So he just paid you to stay away? I asked. That wasn't how he framed it, she said quietly. He said he wanted to make sure his son was taken care of. But yes, he also asked that I not contact you. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming even though I hadn't. Did he ever see him? I asked. A few times when John was a baby, she said. Then less and less. Eventually it was just birthdays and Christmas cards. Money every month. He always paid on time. The way she said that, almost respectful, made something inside me twist painfully. Nathan had been reliable. Responsible. Even in his secret life. I don't understand, I said. He worked from home. We were together all the time. When would he even? I live in Dayton, she said gently. It's not that far. An hour and a half. Close enough for day trips. Close enough for lies to fit neatly into a work schedule. I felt suddenly cold, like all the warmth had drained out of the room. Why didn't you ever tell me? I asked. It came out more like a whisper than a question. Another long pause. Because he begged me not to, she said finally. He said he was afraid you'd leave. He promised he would always support us as long as I respected his marriage. Her words were calm, but underneath them I could hear years of compromise. Resignation. Maybe even guilt. So you just agreed? I asked. I didn't want to blow up someone else's life, she said. And I needed stability for my son. He kept his promise. I kept mine. The fairness of that logic made it somehow worse. Neither of them had seen me as a person with a right to know. Just a variable in an equation. I realized I had stopped crying entirely. Not because I was okay, because something inside me had gone numb again, the way it had right after the hospital. Does he know? I asked suddenly. John, she said. He knows Nathan was his father. He doesn't know much beyond that. I swallowed hard. Does he know Nathan is gone? Yes, she said softly. I told him last week. A sharp ache bloomed in my chest at that. A child somewhere had been told his father died, and I hadn't even known he existed. I'm not asking you for anything, she added quickly. Not money, not involvement. I just thought you deserved the truth. Deserved. The word echoed hollowly. We sat in silence for several seconds, two strangers connected by a man who was no longer alive to explain himself. I need to go, I said finally. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Of course, she replied. I'm truly sorry, Maria. For everything. I ended the call without saying goodbye. Then I just sat there on the floor, staring at nothing, trying to reconcile the man I had loved with the one I had just learned about. Nathan hadn't cheated on me during our marriage. He had simply built our marriage on top of a secret he never intended to share. And somehow, that felt even worse. I drove to Nathan's parents' house the next morning without calling first. It wasn't planned. I woke up after maybe 2 hours of shallow, fractured sleep with one thought pounding in my head: they might know. Not because of anything specific, just a gut feeling that wouldn't leave me alone. Richard and Margaret Cole lived in Springfield, about 40 minutes from Maplewood, in the same brick ranch house Nathan had grown up in. We had Sunday dinners there at least twice a month before he died. Margaret would overcook everything out of habit. Richard would complain about politics, and Nathan would squeeze my hand under the table like we were sharing a private joke. Normal family stuff. By the time I pulled into their driveway, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. Their car was there. The curtains were open. It looked exactly like every other time I had visited. Except this time I felt like an intruder. Margaret answered the door, still wearing her house slippers and a cardigan, her gray hair pinned up loosely like she hadn't expected company. Her face lit up for half a second, relief, maybe, before she saw my expression. "Oh, Maria," she said softly. "I was just thinking about you. Come in, sweetheart." Her voice was warm, maternal, familiar. It made my throat tighten unexpectedly. I stepped inside, and the house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. Safe smells. Domestic smells. The kind that had always made me feel like I belonged here. Not anymore. Richard was in the living room, reading the newspaper like he always did, glasses low on his nose. He looked up when he heard me. "Maria," he said, setting the paper aside. "You should have called. We would have come to you." I didn't sit down. "I spoke to Jennifer Hale," I said. The effect was immediate. Margaret's hand froze halfway to her mouth. Richard's shoulders stiffened like someone had just snapped a board across his back. The silence that followed was thick and unmistakable. They knew. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling down an elevator shaft. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. My voice sounded hoarse, scraped raw. Margaret's eyes filled with tears instantly. "Oh, honey." Richard exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead like he had a headache. Neither of them looked surprised. Neither of them asked what I meant. Confirmation without words. "How long?" I asked. My hands were shaking again, but I didn't bother hiding it. "How long have you known he had a child?" Margaret started crying in earnest, covering her mouth as if she could muffle the sound. Richard stood up, moving closer but not touching me, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed. "Nathan told us years ago," he said carefully. "He made us promise not to interfere." "Interfere?" I repeated. The word sounded absurd in my ears. "You mean not tell his wife that he had another child?" Margaret sobbed harder. "He was terrified you'd leave him." Something hot and sharp flared in my chest. "So your solution was to lie to me for a decade?" I asked. "We didn't lie," Richard said, his tone firm but not unkind. "We just respected his wishes." I stared at him, trying to process the calm practicality in his voice. Like this was a difficult but reasonable situation, not a bomb dropped into the center of my life. "He said he had it handled," Richard continued. "That he was taking responsibility financially. He didn't want to disrupt your marriage." Disrupt. My laugh came out brittle and hollow. "Right. Because hiding a whole child is the less disruptive option." Margaret reached for my hand, but I pulled it back before she could touch me. The rejection seemed to physically wound her. "We love you, Maria," she said through tears. "You're our daughter too." "That doesn't feel true right now," I replied quietly. Richard cleared his throat, his jaw tight. "Nathan did what he thought was right. He made a mistake before he met you, and he tried to make sure the child didn't suffer for it." "A mistake?" I echoed. "You mean a person? An 8-year-old person?" He didn't argue. "And what about me?" I asked. "Did anyone worry about whether I deserved to know the truth about my own marriage?" Margaret's shoulders shook. "He said he would tell you eventually." "When?" My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. "When the kid turned 18. When he needed college tuition. When I accidentally ran into them at a grocery store." Neither of them answered. The silence felt like confirmation. I suddenly felt like I was standing outside my own life, watching strangers discuss it. These were people who had celebrated holidays with me, hugged me at my wedding, cried with me at Nathan's funeral. And they had been keeping this secret the entire time. "I keep replaying our life," I said, my voice dropping again, quieter but more dangerous. "Vacations. Christmas mornings. Random Tuesday nights on the couch. All of it feels fake now." "It wasn't fake," Margaret insisted desperately. "He loved you. More than anything." "Then why wasn't I worth the truth?" I asked. That shut her up. Richard spoke instead, slower now. "Because he was afraid of losing you." The simplicity of that answer knocked the air out of me. He didn't hide the truth because he didn't care. He hid it because he cared more about keeping me than being honest with me. Which somehow didn't make it better. Margaret wiped her face with a tissue, her hands trembling. "Jennifer reached out to us after she heard. She thought we should know John had lost his father." "Of course she did." "And?" I asked cautiously. "We've met him," Richard said. The words hit like a physical blow. "Already?" "Twice," Margaret whispered. "He's a sweet boy. Quiet. Very polite." I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. They had met Nathan's secret son before I even knew he existed. "It's not his fault," Margaret said quickly, as if anticipating my reaction. "He didn't choose any of this." "I know that," I snapped, immediately hating how harsh it sounded. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. I know it's not his fault. The problem wasn't the child. The problem was that his existence rewrote my entire marriage. Richard stepped closer, his voice softer now. He looks like Nathan, he said. I flinched as if he'd slapped me. I don't need to know that. Margaret's face crumpled. He asked about you. My heart stuttered painfully. What? He knows his father had a wife, she said gently. Jennifer told him. He wanted to know if you were nice. I didn't know how to respond to that. There was no script for being evaluated by a child you never knew existed. We told him you were kind, Margaret added. That you loved Nathan very much. A sharp, aching pressure built behind my eyes. Richard hesitated, then said, we think it might be good for you to meet him. For closure. Closure. I almost laughed again, but it would have come out ugly. Closure for who? I asked. Because it doesn't sound like it's for me. For everyone, Margaret said softly. He's part of Nathan. And you are the most important person in Nathan's life. Important enough to love. Not important enough to trust. I can't, I said, the words slipping out before I had fully decided on them. I can't. Margaret nodded quickly, tears still falling. Of course. No pressure. None at all. But the way she said it made it clear they hoped I would change my mind. I walked out a few minutes later, barely remembering the goodbye. The drive home passed in a blur of traffic lights and exit signs I didn't consciously register. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I just sat in the car with the engine running, staring at the house Nathan and I had built together. Except now it felt like it had been built on top of something buried. Something alive. And for the first time since the phone call, the reality fully settled in. I wasn't just grieving my husband. I was grieving a version of my life that had never actually existed. For a while after that, everyone stopped pushing. Not because the situation got easier, because it got quieter. Like the shockwave had already passed through and left everything rearranged, but intact enough to pretend normal life could resume. It couldn't. I went back to work part-time at the high school because staying home all day had started to feel like being sealed inside a memory. Teenagers complaining about homework and cafeteria food turned out to be strangely grounding. Their problems were immediate, loud, uncomplicated. No one there knew about Jennifer or John or the hidden years of payments. To them, I was just Mrs. Smith, the counselor who kept tissues in her desk drawer and told them college wasn't the only path to a good life. But even there, I couldn't escape it completely. Every time a parent mentioned their child. Every time I saw a father waiting in the pickup line. Every time a student talked about family in the present tense, like it was something stable and predictable. I found myself doing math constantly. 7 years of payments. $1,850 a month. More than $150,000 quietly siphoned out of our life. That was the down payment on a bigger house. Fertility treatments we had hesitated to pursue because of cost. Vacations we postponed. The kitchen remodel we did in phases instead of all at once. I hated myself for thinking about money when the real issue was betrayal, but the practical side wouldn't shut up. Every delayed plan suddenly had a reason. Angela was the only person I told everything to. She sat across from me at my kitchen table one night, still in her scrubs, her expression getting darker with every detail. That's not just a secret, she said finally. That's a whole parallel life. He wasn't living with them, I said automatically, like I needed to defend him even now. He barely saw the kid. That doesn't make it better, she replied. It means he compartmentalized it. I didn't answer. Because she wasn't wrong. Are you going to meet them? She asked. I don't know. Her jaw tightened. You don't owe anyone that. Not the kid, not his parents, not her. I know. But knowing something intellectually doesn't stop the emotional tug underneath. A few days later, my therapist asked the same question in a softer way. What do you feel when you imagine meeting him? Dr. Price said, her voice calm and neutral as always. I stared at the rug between us. Fear, I admitted. Anger. And guilt, which makes me furious at myself. Why guilt? Because he didn't choose any of this, I said. He just exists. And now I'm the adult deciding whether he gets cut off from the only connection he has to his father. She nodded slowly. You're allowed to have boundaries even if someone else is innocent. I know, I repeated, but it sounded weaker this time. What do you feel when you imagine not meeting him? She asked. I hesitated longer. Also guilt, I said quietly. And relief. And this horrible feeling that I'm abandoning someone. Abandoning him, she clarified, or abandoning the version of yourself you think you're supposed to be? I didn't answer because I didn't know. A week passed. Then another. I almost convinced myself the situation might just fade. That everyone would settle into their own lives, and I could tuck this secret into the same mental drawer where I kept everything else that hurt too much to examine closely. Then Margaret called. Her voice sounded tentative, like she was afraid I might hang up. Maria, sweetheart, I hope it's not a bad time. It's fine, I said, though my pulse had already started climbing. We're having lunch on Sunday, she continued carefully. Nothing formal. Just at Willow Creek Diner in Dayton. I closed my eyes. Dayton. Jennifer's city. Jennifer and John will be there, she added gently. We wanted to invite you too. Only if you feel ready. There's absolutely no pressure. No pressure. Except every word was pressure. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm not sure I can handle that. That's completely understandable, she said quickly. We just thought, sometimes seeing something is less frightening than imagining it. Or more. Richard's voice came faintly in the background, asking something I couldn't make out. Margaret covered the phone for a moment, then came back. He says to tell you we'll support whatever you decide. Which probably meant they hoped I'd say yes. After we hung up, I sat on the couch staring at the blank TV screen, my reflection faintly visible in the dark glass. I looked older than I remembered. Not just tired, worn down, like something essential had been sanded away. I tried to picture the lunch. A booth in a diner. Coffee cups. Small talk that would feel grotesquely normal. And across from me, a little boy who shared DNA with the man I had loved more than anyone else in the world. Would he look like Nathan at that age? Would he tilt his head the same way when he was thinking? Would he smile with that slightly crooked grin that used to undo me every time? Or worse, would he not resemble Nathan at all, making the connection feel abstract and impossible to reconcile? I also pictured Jennifer, the woman who had known a version of my husband I never would. Not an enemy, not exactly, but not neutral either. Someone who had participated in keeping me in the dark, even if she had her reasons. And then there were Nathan's parents, watching both of us like fragile objects they were trying not to break further. There was no scenario where it wasn't awful. That night, I wandered into our bedroom, my bedroom now, I guess, and opened Nathan's closet. His clothes still hung exactly where he left them. I hadn't been able to donate them yet. They still smelled faintly like his detergent, like the life we used to share. I pressed my face into one of his shirts and felt that familiar, aching mixture of love and anger surge up again. How could you do this? I whispered into the fabric. How could you not trust me enough to tell me? Of course there was no answer. Just the quiet hum of the house settling around me. I lay awake most of the night imagining two futures. In one, I go to the diner. I meet the child. Maybe I see pieces of Nathan in him that hurt and comfort at the same time. Maybe it opens a door I can't close again. In the other, I don't go. I protect myself. I draw a line and keep my life separate from the secret Nathan left behind. But that version comes with its own shadow, the knowledge that somewhere, a little boy might grow up wondering why the woman his father loved wanted nothing to do with him. Morning came whether I slept or not. Sunday is 2 days away now. Margaret said they'd understand if I didn't show. That there would be no judgment, no resentment. I'm not sure I believe that. I'm also not sure which choice I can live with. So I keep going in circles, standing in the ruins of a marriage that was both real and not, trying to decide whether compassion is healing, or just another way to hurt myself. If I walk into that diner, I don't know what I'll lose. If I don't know what I'll regret. And I honestly can't tell which one is worse.